Three, two, one. Okay, we are recording. Today we have brought our first guest, not the second guest because Ezekiel will be tomorrow now. Brian Sang. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
How's it
Thank you
going?
for having me on the show.
Of course, of course. How's your day been so far?
It's been all right. Um, just finishing up some more stuff on Nuggets at Nuggets
Mm,
SRQ. Plug.
yeah, I love the intro episode. We were talking about this earlier, but I did see in the comments, and I actually saw this when I was an up and coming Rainbow Six Siege YouTuber. When I got 20 views an episode, there would be small YouTubers who would leave comments on my videos, and I realized that they did not watch them. They just wanted me to subscribe. But it was
Yeah.
it seemed like a
It's a
arduous.
marketing ploy.
It's definitely a marketing ploy because it's like arduous to like comment on each small YouTuber's videos just to get them to follow you. It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. I don't know if it's like
I
a
think
bot or if they like just like
it might be a bot now that I think about it.
do
But
whatever.
I did bring you on today. I wanted the subject of today's conversation to be about the 2020 election. We have it upcoming in November. I'm
It's a
just
hot
curious, Brian.
topic.
It is a hot topic. I'm just curious, Brian, will you be old enough to vote?
Unfortunately, I will not be old enough.
No, me
So
neither.
I'll still be a baby by then, which is unfortunate because it's like, it's like 2 months off and it's going to be a very pivotal election.
Yeah,
So
that
I'm upset I won't be able
definitely.
to partake in it.
And I've heard, I think Biden has hinted at it, but he would be in essence like a one-term president. I don't know if that's his age or he's just not willing to go for two terms, but
Is
I
that what he
think
said?
he's hinted at it, is my understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think of that?
Biden as a one-term president. Well, honestly, I feel that for this election is very similar to the previous election where people are essentially choosing the lesser of two evils, at least when it comes from the perspective of a moderate. Um, so we've already had basically one term of Trump's presidency, which a lot of people have been saying that, especially with the coronavirus response and everything going on right now, it seems that his, how do you call it, his pollings or
Mhm.
his numbers, they've been seeming to decrease with that, with
Yes,
his response. So I think now more than ever, Biden has a great chance of becoming the next president. Especially with like the only people who I've been seeing support Trump are the people who've always been supporting Trump. It doesn't seem like he's
exactly.
getting any new support recently.
Yeah, I feel there's no real new appeal in the 2020 election, which is part of the issue in these like crucial swing states. So you have these moderate voters who like voted for Obama for two terms and then they voted for Trump. I don't see them voting for Trump again in particularly the Midwest. So even before COVID, I thought that Biden already had it pretty much in the bag. But I guess with the COVID and his response, it's gotten pretty bad. But
Yeah.
piggybacking off the one term thing, in essence, it would make his VP pick the head of the Democratic Party, which makes Biden's VP pick kind of a pivotal point in the Democratic Party. Who do you think would be the best to lead the Democratic Party after Biden?
If Biden, well, we already know that Biden is going to be choosing a woman for
Mhm.
VP, which already in of itself is like, it's just so, it's a huge turn for the Democrats and for like the
Mhm.
entire political world as a whole. And so as who he's going to pick exactly, the only real name I've been hearing been bouncing around a lot is like Amy Klobuchar.
Mhm.
And I haven't really heard any other names besides her that has like some like legitimate grounds. Um, but if she was the VP, if she were to be the VP, I think she could be a very good representative for the Democratic Party. But also, I think for the Democratic Party as a whole, they seem very, they don't seem very united in particular right now. Like
Mhm.
Trump during his presidency has basically absorbed the Republican Party. Like he is the
Yeah.
conservative party. But the Democrats don't really have that, and they never really had. Same with the Republicans. I don't really think they've had any besides like Reagan there wasn't any particular person who like represented the entire party.
Yeah.
And both through the Democrats, I feel Biden wasn't necessarily chosen by the party. It was more like it kind of just got thrown in his lap. Because near
Mhm.
the end of the during the primaries, it was mainly between him and Biden. And sorry, not Biden, between Biden and Biden. No, between Biden and Sanders.
Mhm.
And the Democratic Party. I feel that them and a lot of other people felt that Sanders was too extreme
Yeah.
to potentially become president, and so then it became just a battle of who could potentially beat Trump,
Yeah.
which is a very dangerous mindset to go through because yes, we want to have a Democrat in office, but will he bring the best ideals? And
Exactly.
Biden is such a strange character. Just going on to Biden, he you know his mannerisms are just very janky.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of what
Just
he does doesn't feel real.
thinking back to the primary and previous presidential elections, it seems uh, liberals have been caught in the mindset that we need or they need to choose this one candidate who would best defeat Trump. Yet when we look back at previous elections, particularly the 2004 election, when the Democrats picked John Kerry as the safe pick, even though he was pretty moderate at the time, yet they still lost. So the electability argument isn't necessarily true in that sense. I do believe that Biden probably would have had the best chance at beating um, Trump just based off the polling numbers alone. I feel Bernie, I don't, I'm scared, not scared, but a little tenuous to say um, divisive as a figure. But I feel
Bernie is very divisive. Yeah.
he is divisive, and I feel he put that on himself by using the socialist label. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. But even if he didn't label himself as a socialist, many of his policies are very socialist in nature. And I think
Hmm.
people have always realized that by him attaching a label to it. I don't really know if how much that affected him. But yeah, it definitely did. And of course there's a whole stigma in the US in general about, socialism slash communism and that kind
Hmm.
of thing. And I think a lot of people don't really know what socialism and communism is. It's kind of just this trigger word, if you will, that's tossed around a
Hmm.
lot, specifically by the Republican Party. And it's come to a point where I don't think people really know what it is anymore.
Hmm.
And I think some of the things that Sanders was preaching, yes, it is a socialist policy, but it could potentially be beneficial towards the United States. Like, for example, universal healthcare. That's something that's very heavily debated. And,
Hmm.
it's hard to necessarily gauge what its impact would be. But
Exactly.
as a principle, it is a good principle to have.
Hmm.
Whether it will work or not is a separate question. But
Hmm.
these people are flaming Sanders not because of his ideas necessarily, but they're just because he has a label, the socialist. People automatically are turned off from him. And I think that's kind of
Yeah.
unfortunate.
I feel that was really brought to the limelight in the last Democratic debate when Bloomberg just straight out called Bernie a social or not a socialist, but like a commie, basically. And it
Oh
was,
yeah, Bloomberg. Bloomberg
yeah,
was awful.
he was, yeah, he was a little bit striking in his performance, but it's kind of, it just exemplifies how we use these labels in today's politics without actually like looking at the substance of what these people are saying. And when you look at Bernie, he's been saying the same thing since he was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont in like the
Yeah,
80s,
it's very
when
impressive.
Vermont at the time was a very conservative state and he had won as a socialist candidate. And
Yeah.
he's perpetuated that same platform, which I would commend him for, and yet people aren't accepting of new ideas. What do you think has why do you think that is?
Honestly, I think pretty much all of it is attributed towards like the Cold War. And
Really?
yeah, because during that kind of time frame, there was an enemy, and that enemy was communism.
Hmm.
They didn't want to spread. There's the whole Iron Wall, that whole thing,
Hmm.
and because of that, the kids and the adults during that time, they're taught that communism is bad, which that I mean, the way it was practiced in this country, it definitely was. It definitely did not help anyone at all,
Yeah.
except the dictators at the time. But people don't really connect that now, because when people say socialism, people would just refer to socialism as like communism light.
Hmm.
And because that association is made, people automatically say that any socialist policy is automatically communist, automatically
Exactly.
bad. And again, that's very unfortunate that we have that kind of mindset. Also, I think during that time when it was like Sanders versus Biden, to be honest, in my personal opinion, I thought Sanders would have probably been the better candidate, just um, because I don't necessarily agree with with like his socialist policies. I didn't think that
Hmm.
they made like economic sense. But I think that one of the great things about the U.S. is that there's three branches: the executive, legislative, and the judicial. And I thought that, and in my mindset, that yeah, Sanders, he has these ideas and that he can work on them, but there's a process to it. Unlike other countries where basically the leader says this is this and that is what it is, especially in like
Hmm.
countries with like one parties. So that's one thing about America. There's a process to legislation, and for that reason, I thought that Sanders' mindset was much better than Biden's. He was definitely firm in like what he wanted, and you can tell like just by seeing him throughout his entire political career, he really did care for America a lot. He really does care
Yeah.
about making us better, and I thought that mindset would be so much better than whatever Biden does, talking about his leg hair.
Mhm. Thinking about the mindset, though, I think one of the issues if Bernie were to be elected president is he would kind of be a lame duck, because even if you have like a Democrat majority in the House, as we do now, and a Democrat majority in the Senate, as it looks like we might have, even then, the moderate Democrats, it would be difficult for him to pass his agenda. And I'm not sure, because of like the hold that these medical companies or big pharma have on the legislature. I don't know if he would be able to
Hmm.
pass Medicare for all, because if you look back in history when Obama was able to pass Obamacare, it was so difficult to get all the Democrats on his side, let alone a few, I believe, Republicans in the Senate that he needed, maybe one or two, to approve of it.
Yeah.
So, would you agree that I just don't know if he'd be effective as president, I,
Well, I think
particularly
that
on
goes
domestic affairs?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to like the entire concept of like lobbying as a whole, because
Hmm.
that's a whole nother debate. People say that these corporations shouldn't just like throw out money to push their agendas. And again, there's that other argument that says, it's their money, let them do what they want. We can't just say like,
Hmm.
oh, you can't spend your money. And that it is definitely a very tough issue to cover. But yeah, lobbying in America is like, it's huge. And again, that just goes to America being much more corporate compared to other
Hmm.
countries in general. And I think that's something that's honestly very it's something very necessary that we have in America, like not just America, but
Hmm.
like the world. I feel that because when you look at the most successful companies, the most innovative companies, the vast majority of them, pretty much all of them, are from America. America is basically like the homeland for success, you can even say that.
Hmm.
And it's really pivotal because yes, these like the European countries and the and more West. Yeah, that's the word. But yeah, these more European countries, you can tell that the government there is much more focused on people, because they have much more expansive social networks and social nets in general for those people. And in America, you don't really see that to the same extent.
Hmm.
It's much more cutthroat. It's much more focused on yourself. And I think that
Yeah.
because of that, and because of that cultural and societal um, mindset, we're able to see a lot more productivity and a lot more success in America, which I think
Yeah.
is something that is important for the world. But it goes on to say like, how important our is our own health then, if we're
Yeah.
just, slaves to the big economic machine.
Exactly. I'm just trying to remember a piece of evidence, and it said if we didn't have our current medical system, I don't know if this is in reference to the past or the future, we wouldn't have 40 medical cures that have been made or would have been made. Because you
Mhm.
look to what we have right now, and the US is the one who's making a lot of these medical advancements. And if the US wasn't doing it,
Yeah.
other countries with these socialized healthcare systems, they're not putting as much money into research and development as the US is because we have that profit incentive. We see in other countries, particularly I'm thinking Canada, where they're able to make these generic drugs off these American innovations. And since we can't enforce our patent laws overseas, we put all the money into it in the forefront to come up with these ideas. And yet we have foreign companies who are able to rip them off as generic drugs for pennies on the dollar what it cost the American companies. So I
Mhm.
feel as a world leader, it'd be difficult in the future to strike a balance between the two, innovation and a proper healthcare system, as compared to what we have right now.
It definitely is, yeah. And but like for example, that whole like fiasco with like EpiPen a couple years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, where the rate was just like it was completely unjustified for them to jack it up
I
so
agree.
high. And that's the thing, because these companies, they can do it just because they want to. It doesn't
Mhm,
matter about all the families that are affected from that.
mhm.
And I'm not sure exactly right now if there's any legislation to really prevent that. I
Yeah,
believe he
yeah.
was sued, wasn't he?
No, 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 no. It was kind of ironic because I think Trump, I think it was a month ago, for people on Medicare, he capped the, no, this was insulin actually. So kind of a side tangent. Like he capped the insulin cost at like, I think $60 a month for Medicare patients, which it's
Hmm.
ironic because the media, they don't really look at the stuff Trump is actually doing. They just look at the sensational stuff he's doing. But I feel
That's very true.
there are genuine advancements that the administration has done in certain fields, and yet since it's not part of Trump's personality that they like to
Mhm.
make fun of, or some like the sensationalist stuff that he might say that might be wrong, just gets swept under the rug, like the insulin point.
Yeah, I mean, the media is also just a big corporation, so they
Yeah,
got to do
yeah,
what they got to do to make money. And
yeah.
yeah, Trump definitely gets a bad rep from the media, and honestly, a lot of it I do feel is justified, especially now with his coronavirus response and his response to the protests. I feel like some of the flame he's getting for that definitely is warranted. But yeah,
Mhm.
you're definitely right, though. There is a lot of things that his administration has done that has been beneficial that they don't really cover, which is unfortunate. But they got to do what they got to do as a business. That's what they're
Mhm.
promoting, and that's why
Well,
there's Fox News.
yeah. Going back to the healthcare point, do you think it'd be more advantageous for us to implement a single, or rather, public option before we do universal healthcare, or do you think it'd be better just to go to universal healthcare outright?
Honestly, I'm not too. I don't exactly know too much of how this like functions economically,
Mhm.
but I do believe, like from a moral standpoint and from like what would be the best for the United States, that the option of a public healthcare is definitely the best way to go.
Mhm.
Because again, there's already tons of people right now who are so used to corporate healthcare, and especially getting
Yeah.
it from their employers or whatnot. And sometimes they get really good deals, and that's not something they're willing to give up.
Yeah.
And again, that should be also be that's also a big part of the United States, about how the government basically shouldn't dictate what you can and can't do.
Mhm.
So again,
Exactly.
by having a universal healthcare system, that would basically rob these people of not just their healthcare, but also a personal right of theirs.
Yeah. Talking about the healthcare that they have right now, we often look to like the employer healthcare that's often negotiated by the unions, and yet it costs so much money for the unions to negotiate it, and then the bloat in the insurance companies, we're paying billions of dollars for these people to have jobs when in a universal healthcare world they wouldn't have these jobs. It's kind of unnecessary how much
That's also true.
like gloat
Yeah.
there is.
Yeah, you're basically taking out the entire insurance company as a whole. Well,
Yeah,
health insurance is probably the largest
it's a
insurance.
very large industry. Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes on to like other things like taxes. I remember there was this one candidate way back. I think this might have been in 2002, 2008 maybe. But anyway, one of his biggest proposals was a flat tax percentage.
Mhm.
I think it was saying like everyone has like a 15% tax or something like that.
I think that was Gary
Which,
Johnson. Is a flat tax. Flat tax.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But the
Yeah.
point is, yeah, he was going for like a flat tax, and that just goes to show that there's the American tax system, and just I feel that the way America handles its economics as a whole is just it's so it's just very unconsumer friendly. So it's
Hmm.
very difficult for people to actually grasp it, which is why there are these insurance and these tax companies who are able to create entire businesses out of helping people out with that.
Yeah,
And is that really necessary? I mean, that's a whole other question.
exactly.
Yeah,
I think one of the problems with the flat tax system, like what Gary Johnson proposed, is I think there have been a few studies on this, but it disproportionately affects those in the lower class, those who don't make as much
absolutely.
money,
Yeah.
because it costs so much to buy these goods, and yet, um, let's say like a rich person, they're paying the same, if not comparable, amounts of money for like food and living expenses, and they're being taxed the same as the rich people. The rich people might just have more like discretionary spending. So the flat
Hmm.
tax would probably hurt the economy more than it would help. But it's a good thought experiment.
It probably would. Yeah. And I think one thing people don't really realize is how much individuals, at least the high paid individuals, how much they are taxed,
Mhm.
because there is a corporate tax, which is like a whole separate issue, because there are corporations who are literally paying zero in taxes, which,
Exactly.
I don't think that should be happening. But people, for example, they call on Jeff Bezos and say like, oh, you haven't paid your taxes. He does pay his taxes, and he pays quite a bit, actually, because I believe the highest tax bracket, which him and the rest of the 1% definitely fall in, I believe it's about like 48%
It's pretty
of
high.
their
Yeah.
income is taxed. It's very, very high. Yeah. And so that's just a misconception I think a lot of people have. But I think that does bring the corporations into question, because can you say that with the economic growth that they bring with jobs and products or whatnot, is that substantial enough for them to pay nothing in taxes? Because again, like Andrew Yang, this is something he preached a lot, is that if we were to apply the corporate tax onto Amazon, Google, whatever, then we could fund so much things. I think he was saying like even like public education, his whole like UBI, $1,200,000 a month for
Hmm.
every citizen. That's things that could be funded if these corporations pay what they should be paying.
Yeah. I think it's kind of ironic when we look back at these figures like Romney, who when he was governor of Massachusetts, like they were in a budget deficit, and like we make fun of him in 20 when he ran in 2012 and was the nominee on the Republican Party. I think SNL made a joke like we closed the loopholes as a joke, but when we look back at his record, like in Massachusetts, we literally called it Taxachusetts because of how highly taxed people were. And yet he closed the loopholes and he brought the state into not just a budget surplus, he implemented Romney Care, which is literally like the predecessor to Obamacare. So it
I didn't know about
it's
Romney Care.
yeah, it's kind of ironic, but like on both sides of the aisle, we don't actually see like this was initially like I don't want to say conservative idea because it's clearly a liberal idea, but conservative was the first like governor to implement it,
To
and
act
yet the
on it, yeah.
Republicans so fearlessly hated Obama for it in 2008 when he passed it. And yet we can't think about doing as Romney said, close the loopholes now and like on Amazon and other, and I think Apple uses like tax havens and they store their
Hmm.
IPs in like Ireland, for example, I believe, is
Yeah,
so
well,
that they don't
offshore
get
banking is a whole
taxed
other thing.
and
Yeah.
offshore banking. And it's just there's so many ways that money gets out of our country where it really should be taxed.
Exactly. Yeah, they have all these loopholes, and it it's hard to crack down on it, because again, like the whole reason why offshore banking is so effective is because it's not in the United States jurisdiction.
Hmm.
But there definitely are loopholes that can be closed off. Like I believe is it Connecticut? I think it is Connecticut, right? Where it's like there's like zero taxes for LLCs,
I
for like
don't know if it's
corporations.
Connecticut. It might be. I'd have to look that up.
Or
Not
maybe it was
sure.
like Vermont or something. But
I think
I
New Hampshire doesn't have a sales tax. That's different.
yeah, and I know that Florida is also very, very low. So
No state income tax in Florida. Yeah.
yeah, so that's why you see these corporations, and
Mhm.
where the LLC is founded, it's usually in one of these states. And I believe they have actually introduced legislation to make offshore banking harder. I believe.
Yeah.
I remember I was reading something about that. But
Mhm.
that's not going to stop these corporations from doing what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know when I lived in Fort Myers, Hertz had just moved from I think it was Massachusetts,
Hurts.
but Hertz moved, and now because they moved to Florida because it reduced expenditures clearly, but we see now with COVID, Hertz is actually going out of business, and
Do
they're
you
selling
know
like
what the whole like fiasco with Hertz right now?
they have to
Like
sell
from
all their cars.
from the stocks? Like what's
I
happening
mean,
to Hertz stocks? So what happened with Hertz stocks is that they declared bankruptcy, right?
yeah, yeah,
And then so what happened was because of that, for some reason, I'm not sure why, but okay, one of their biggest investors, I forgot
uh,
his name, but basically he sold all of his shares of Hertz
oh,
for it was like for like 70 cents a share. He sold all
mhm.
of his shares that he had, which was like a ton. It was a ton of shares. And for some reason, a bunch of people on Robinhood thought to themselves, now is the best time to buy Hertz. So they bought so much stock of Hertz that it basically pumped the stock up. It brought it, I think it brought it from like 80 cents a share to like $2.20. It was massive. And this all happened over a span of like 3 something days. And then so they pumped up the stock massively. But here's the thing: there's so many people selling, and there's some people who are buying, and now there's no one who's selling. So now Hertz is at this like weird limbo state where on paper they're still very much alive, but as an actual company, they're like gone under the dust. And this guy, like the investor who like dumped all his shares, he lost like $1.8 billion by doing that. So like that was like a whole like fiasco.
Yeah.
But
I
like,
just so
but
it's
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 not going to
at
be sustainable.
257 right now. It's up
257.
$1 from yesterday. Oh my god.
Yeah, it was going massive, and it's like, you know,
It's
for anyone who
violently.
like any
Yeah.
for anyone who is investing in it, like it's not a good play.
Yeah.
But it's just so funny what happened to Hertz.
But like looking at the Hertz liquidation sales, you can see like these Mustangs and Camaros for like 10,000 below market value. And it's like
Really?
no haggling. You just get like 2018, 2019 cars with like maybe 10,000, 20,000 miles on them. And it's just like convertibles. And it's like any Hertz lot where you could rent a car, they're now selling them. It's
Is there
amazing.
one in Florida?
There's one in Tampa. There's one in Fort Myers. I don't know if I think the closest one is Tampa. Yeah.
I
But
think it's time
there's
to
some
get a
amazing.
Mustang. John Steinbrook.
Yeah, yeah. It,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny, but it's like you see all these companies, and I know Enterprise and one other company. There's like three major ones. I don't think
Mhm.
Enterprise has gone down because they're the biggest one, but still, they have to sell off a bunch of their cars, and then you see the auto manufacturers themselves. They had all these buy orders from the rental car agencies because usually they buy new, and they're like, we can't buy the new cars, and now you have all these new cars that the
Yeah.
auto manufacturers have, and it's like, who do we sell these to? And it's like the Toyota thon, like, please buy a Toyota.
Toyota
It's like
thon.
no one's gonna buy your Toyota, and it's
The
just
Kia
tough
summer
to
sales
see that.
event.
Exactly.
It is. Yeah. But like companies, these car companies in particular, they really got to find a way to change what they do. Like GM, actually, GM is doing very well right now because they're making ventilators,
Yeah.
which is something that's really good for them. But I'm not exactly sure about those other European companies, like BMW or like Mercedes, or like what they're going to do
Mm.
about it. But yeah, car sales way down, rentals down. Airbnb is down like 42%, something like that. It's
Mm.
massive. So, and like all these companies are getting like so hard hit, and the protests, some of them are getting even harder hit, you know,
Yeah.
it's not ending.
Yeah. I heard it was more of a liberal estimate, but 50% of restaurants won't make it through COVID because the biggest issue with restaurants is it's such a razor thin profit margin already.
Oh yeah,
And
for
even if
sure.
they're allowed to reopen at like 25 or 50% capacity, like they're just barely making money at 100% capacity. So even
Mhm.
if they reopen, they're losing money. So between like 25 or 50% of restaurants will end up closing. So how would we like I don't know if there is a solution to that.
I mean, going out to the restaurants, here's the craziest thing about, those businesses as a whole. So if you look at the latest stimulus bill that they've passed, right? So
Hmm.
they basically separated it into like an M1, M2, and M3. So M1 would be for the people. That's your $1,200 you're going to get. The M2 is meant for the businesses for them to help stay afloat. And then M3 is for them just to like buy stocks, for the federal government to
Hmm.
buy stocks. And what you see is that, like, especially for restaurants, because again, as you were saying, they run on such low profit margins. For those restaurants that are applying for that M2 to get money to keep their business afloat, the federal government, and it goes beyond restaurants, but they're the ones most affected. And the federal government goes, no, because it's just too risky to like go into them. And then
Uh-huh.
so now they're basically pushing all that money that would have gone to businesses into just buying stocks, which is why you see the market right now. When you look at the stock market right now, pretty much everything's back to normal. And it's
But
a
it's not
bubble.
really
It's
normal.
Yeah, it's a bubble and it's going to pop
Yeah.
soon. And when that happens, we're gonna go back to reflect what the market is really looking like, which is awful
Mhm.
right now. And then
I
so I
think
think that's
one,
another thing that Trump is doing, just to like bring up his image, because his whole
like,
image is
he's
stock
kind of,
good.
yeah, he's kind of cheesing it because like he points to the
Is
stock market and it's like at what, I don't know, 27,000 right now. But it's like
Yeah, the Dow's at 27.
not every American owns stocks, and yet he holds it as the bastion of like our economic well-being. But I believe unemployment's still at like 13,000, and there's this idea like
13%. Yeah.
13%, and there's this belief that it'll be like a V-shaped recovery, like we go down and then we go back up to the same point. But the issue
Mhm.
was like these, like the airplane companies and all these other big businesses, they were overvalued to begin with. So when you have like,
Yeah,
not, I
absolutely.
don't believe it was a supply side recession, or it might have been a demand side recession. I'm not sure. When you have it go down like that, it'll go up back to where the companies are relatively actually should be valued. So there's not going to be a V
Mhm.
shaped recovery. It's going to be like V, and then you go back to where it might actually be valued. So
Yeah, it's
just
like a
with,
W shape.
yeah, kind of a W.
Yeah.
But I think one of the issues with the Trump campaign is like the only good thing he had going for him in the national light, at least, was the economy, and he doesn't have that
It
now.
was.
So there's
I
no,
think, yeah.
yeah, I just don't see a pathway to the ballot for him right now.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think one of the greatest things that we got proof of right now is that the stock market isn't an actual reflection of the US economy. Because
Mhm.
that was what Trump was pushing so much. He was like, "Oh, look at the market. It's doing tremendous," which it
Yeah,
is. But, market the actual jobs aren't, they aren't changing. They aren't growing, and especially now more than ever it's down. Like unemployment's at 13%. What was the Great
exactly.
Depression? The Great Depression was like 30 something, I
It
think.
was something huge. Yeah,
Yeah, but the
somewhere around
point
there.
is that right now I believe we're at like number 2 in US history,
Yeah, it's
but
bad.
just right behind the Great Depression. So it's awful. And like again, you look at the market and it's like crazy how, again, it's pretty much normal. Actually, if you look at the Nasdaq, it's even higher than it was before coronavirus.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I think Americans really now are understanding the stock market isn't a good reflection of
Yeah.
what's actually going on in the US. And I
I
think
think
because
one
of
of
that,
the,
Trump's gonna have trouble.
yeah, one of the issues is like with the current administration pumping all this money, we don't know what they might actually be worth, and then we don't know how much the Treasury is actually putting in. Like there hasn't been an
Oh
audit.
yeah.
There hasn't been an audit of the Treasury in like dozens of years, and we don't know how much money they've printed. Like we just
Mhm.
accept the value of the dollar for what we think it is, but in reality, it's not backed by anything. It's just backed by the government's word in like the bond
Yeah.
rating, essentially.
The bot. Yeah, but the good thing about, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, bonds right now are pretty much the exact same. So from that
Yeah.
perspective, the Treasury is doing fine. But the Treasury just has, they're they're very hidden with what they do. They're very ludicrous. So
Hmm.
they're printing up all this money, and like you got to think there was 2 stimulus bills. The first one I believe was about like 1 point something trillion, like 1.2 trillion, and the
The
second
CARES
was like
Act,
massive. Yeah, it was like 3
three
like
point something.
3.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's massive. Like we don't have that money just laying around.
No, no.
Um, yeah, so they're definitely printing like crazy. It's just, how much is that going to affect us in the long run?
Yeah. And I think one of the issues is like there are so few congressmen and women who actually like point out like how fiscally not conservative we're being with our money. And like we have
Mhm.
bipartisan support for these bills, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have been passed, but still with the Trump administration, like no Republican rather, besides maybe Rand Paul, actually cares about the budget anymore. And I feel
Yeah.
that idea has been thrown out the window with Trump as president.
I think that also goes to show like the US's ego as a whole, because again, at least currently, the US is still the number one country, the number one economy, the number one nation. And because of that, no other country is going to say like, hey, your dollar is not valuable.
Yeah,
Bonds are still as stable as they have been. So no one is challenging the US. And so because of that, the US can just continue printing money, and the not just the US, but the world itself will still hold the value of the dollar. And it's also kind of ironic because the way the Fed has been printing out money, like what it has been doing, is very representative of like the whole consumerism culture in America.
hmm,
I believe there's a study that says only like 3% of Americans actually like put their money in like a 401k, like Roth IRA,
it's very
and
low. Yeah,
it's like 60 something percent of people can't afford a $500 expense if it were to randomly
yeah,
come up. Americans in general, they don't save their money, and you compare that to other countries. Like for example, I don't know if you know this, but what China is doing, what China's equivalent of a stimulus is that they are giving out money, but in America, they're like, here's your $1,200, do what you want with it. They don't actually say go and spend it, because they know that Americans will spend that money.
hmm,
You look at what China's doing. China's saying like, okay, here is some money, but you have to spend it by the end of the week. If not, then you don't have access to that money anymore.
it's very
So
interesting.
so yeah, it's just like a whole like cultural and societal difference between like the US and like other countries.
Yeah,
It's very telling.
I think that's part of the divide as we learn in psychology between like the individualist culture and like the collectivist culture that we find particularly in China, where the people are working like essentially for the will of the country. But in the
Yeah.
US, people are working for themselves. And that doesn't
Mhm.
really lend credence to something like a pandemic. I feel China, even if they're manipulating their numbers, they still did better than we did, any way you measure it, really.
Yeah, China's like pretty much like 100% back to normal for the most part
Exactly.
right now.
I did hear on NPR like their ironic, like their pollution levels are like back up to the same
The
pre-COVID.
pollution,
Basically. Yeah, the pollution levels.
they're back up.
They're back up to like pre-COVID because like pollution had been cut like
Oh yeah,
50%,
yeah, it
50% or
was.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, one thing that China's doing that's like it's like kind of good, but also kind of sketch at the same time, is that they actually are starting to address the pollution issue, especially in like
Mm,
Beijing, which is like it's like awful there. And they're making some like really great innovations in like air filtering technology, which I
mm,
think it has like it's definitely good, but there's also a very like mechanically like ex machina like yikes when you hear this thing happening, because they're basically like they have like these giant reactor looking things that they're basically saying how like one of these things acts the same as like the not like an entire forest. So now we're basically replacing nature with machine,
mm.
and it's just very sketchy. And also, I don't know if you heard about this, but they plan on making an artificial moon.
What?
Yeah, no, okay, it's so interesting. So they're basically going to send up a satellite which will reflect the same light as about like 2 times the moon. So they're going to use it to replace street lamps. They can
It's
have like
very
a
interesting.
giant artificial moon.
That sounds not good for your health, though, if you think about it. Like you just have
I
a
feel like it
giant.
messed up your circadian rhythm.
It would, yeah, because
Yeah,
like I already have trouble with like the street lamps. You can see through the window. Think how bad it'd be like 2 times moon.
yeah. So that part it hasn't been implemented yet, but
Mhm.
when it does, it'll be like what? Yeah,
I
it'll
think
be
one of the
like
big,
Star Wars with 2 moons.
yeah, one of the big things is like we look back at like the Star Wars program, which I don't know if it was Bush, it might have been another president, but like basically like we could shoot or no, it might have been Reagan. That like essentially we could shoot lasers out of the sky, which was a complete lie.
Oh yeah, that was
The Star
so
Wars program,
weird.
like we could not do that. And China at that time wasn't in a position to rival us, but I think right now, like with the amount of funding NASA has, which is like next to nothing,
Yeah.
I feel China is really has been brought to the forefront of like aeronautical advancement.
Is it China? I thought Russia was doing like a whole lot of that kind of stuff.
Russia's doing a little bit, but I think the issue is like they're just such a shrinking economy. Anything they get is from what they might have already had. But China has so
Yeah,
much wealth in a sense at the
they
government
do.
level that they're able to infuse it into innovation that as a government in the US with the legislature, you just say, well, why would I fund NASA when people need food stamps or something? And the money doesn't go to
Yeah.
NASA. And we, for example, we saw the space shuttle program cut under the Obama administration. That kind of left NASA stranded in a sense. And this also brings up like a bigger idea or frame of view. Like the US thinks in 4-year intervals. And under the Bush administration, he said, like, well, we would have been at Mars by now, essentially. But the issue is under Bush, we were like, we'll go to the moon again and then we'll go to Mars again. And then under Obama, they changed the rules like, oh, we're just going to the moon. And then under Trump,
Mhm.
it's like, oh, we're back going to Mars. And it's like, well, we were going to the moon. So you had like 8 years of lost advancement.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, meanwhile, you have China and they think in these long term intervals and like I've heard like 30 years because they don't have like the accountability to the election in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a one party system. So,
Yeah.
that is something that's very beneficial about having that is that there is one goal and they all work towards it. And, again, with Xi, he basically like destroyed the entire like election process as a whole for China. Like, he'll be there for like as long as he can. And like with that, you'll definitely see more sustainable innovation that happens there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I definitely agree with you with the U.S. being in that 4-year cycle, and it's dangerous in the way that these presidents, when they're put into power, the very first thing, the biggest focus I think that a lot of them have is, I want to get reelected, and then
Yeah.
so how do they do that? By making change. And what do you get with change? That costs money, and that's why you see our national debt is like so exuberantly high compared to like other countries because these presidents just they're very selfish in like what they want. Um, and actually going back onto space, I think the US, like one of the biggest reasons why they've basically like given up on NASA and like why their funding is so low is because of like Elon, like SpaceX. Again, that goes back to like
Yeah.
corporate America. They're basically like, oh, the corporations, they got this. And
Yeah.
they do. Like, saw like the recent shuttle launch that was
Yeah.
successful. That's huge. It was massive.
Yeah.
So, you know, corporate America, Gilded Age.
I I thought it was kind of ironic that it was like NASA X SpaceX for the rocket launch because I was just thinking it's kind of a simpleton view, but like it seems SpaceX did all the work essentially. Like the rocket was theirs, the suits were theirs.
I thought
They were,
NASA supplied the astronauts, didn't they? Is that what it was?
I'm not sure if they did or not. They might have, probably, but it's like the suits they were like literally wearing weren't made by them. I don't think. And the
Yeah,
launch
yeah.
return pad, like the only thing that NASA contributed that I can think besides maybe manpower, I'm not sure, was Cape Canaveral, and that's pretty much
Cape
it.
Canaveral's huge, though. Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
it's big, but like they made their return pad rather in the ocean. It's a drone vehicle that SpaceX uses, so
Hmm.
it's not like NASA came up with that. Yeah,
That's true, but it's definitely more. I guess you could even call it like patriotic to see that like NASA and
yeah,
SpaceX are together. It's like government and private organization
yeah. It's like a
are making this
public-private
happen.
partnership in a sense.
It is. It is. And that's one thing about like space travel right now is that like with Elon with SpaceX and like Bezos with like Origin Blue. I don't know if you heard like back when like both of the companies were like they were like just starting to pick up, and that whole fiasco about bidding for like a to use a launch pad
Mhm.
from NASA. There was like it was very funny because I think if I'm not mistaken, Bezos basically like filed a patent lawsuit against Elon and was like, "Yeah, you can't use this launch pad." And Elon's like, "What?" um, and so there's competition going on right now, and so I think because of that, the U.S. is probably gonna, at least Elon and SpaceX is definitely gonna dominate space travel for the world as a whole.
Yeah. I just going back to like the spending idea, I think one of the issues, it's mainly centralized around Trump. Like he didn't run on fiscal conservatism. And I think moving forward with the Republican Party, there are either two senses. Either one, Trump gets reelected, which I find highly unlikely, where in the 2024 election, we might have someone try to like carry the baton of Trump forward. Maybe someone who was in his
Kanye?
administration, Kanye, maybe. But in reality, I don't see Trump winning re-election. And looking to the 2024 election, people will try to push themselves away from Trump as a president, and there might be a return to that sort of fiscal conservatism that was seen in past elections.
Yeah. Yeah, Trump. Okay, this was some information that came up recently and about Trump, and I haven't really been hearing anyone talk about it, but like just reading it was so fascinating. It was the anonymous leak about the whole connection between Trump and Epstein.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, do you know about that?
I've heard about it a little bit.
Yeah, it's like crazy how like no one is talking about it because like I don't think I can't tell if it's true. I think most people can't really tell if it's real. Even if like people want to think it's real and it looks pretty legit. Like nowadays you can't really tell the legitimacy of a source anymore.
Uh,
And so, but the crazy thing is like no one is talking about it. And if it's true, it'll be a massive, massive deal towards
yeah,
the administration and towards their administration.
yeah, especially not just Epstein, but if you look back at like Trump's record, like at the like legit legal filings of like minors with like incidents with Trump, and like he just pays them exorbitant sums of money and with like
Hmm.
non-disclosure agreements, and like we don't hear about that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
And
and you would think with the media, like if they knew about this, they would really report about it because that's very, very damaging towards Trump.
yeah, exactly. And I think part of the issue with the more liberal media is like the Biden figure. He's not pure either. So I think they just kind of don't talk about it entirely.
Yeah, Biden is so weird.
Yeah, both of them are weird.
Yeah, yeah, and like in some like overlapping ways. So, but yeah, I don't see Trump getting reelected, to be
Yeah.
honest. But again, you never know. Like back in 2016, no one thought he was going to get elected, and look
Yeah.
where he
I
is.
I think one of the issues is though, like the key states when you look at the electoral college, you see North Carolina, Arizona, and then the Midwest. All the polling is indicating like North Carolina went to Trump and so did Arizona, but you see them trending blue. And the polling might have been somewhat like that in 2016, but the Republican Party has kind of lost hope in a sense at him winning these states, and yet they still think, oh, he's going to win the election somehow.
Mhm.
But you can't get to 270 by like counting with your hands. You have to win the states.
You do need to win the states, yeah. And I don't know if Trump has that in him
Yeah,
anymore. Um, yeah, but if his support remain, if his supporters remain the same as they've always been, then you never know. But either
Mhm.
way, I feel like no matter if Trump becomes president or Biden becomes president, it at least for me and from my perspective, there's no satisfying conclusion to it
Mhm.
unless you vote libertarian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just looking forward though, when we look to the 2024 election, we did this in 2016 as well to try and see like who would run on the Democrat side. But like in your ideal world, who do you think would run on either side in 2024? So let's just say Joe Biden's.
2024.
Let's say Joe Biden is president and he picks, I don't know, Kamala Harris as his VP. Who do you think would run on either side?
Kamala Harris. Ooh. Actually, you know what? I prefer Kamala Harris to Amy.
Mm,
Anyway, saying who's going to run for 2024 is very difficult. If any of the Florida senators or governor were to
yeah,
run, like Ron or Rick or like Marco, then
little Marco.
little Marco, little Marco. Honestly, probably between all of them, maybe Rubio has a chance. Honestly, back in the 2016 election, I thought Rubio was going to go a lot further than what he did, and he had that big
Mhm.
blunder on stage where like
With
he
Chris
repeated
Christie.
himself. Yeah,
Yeah.
Chris
Yeah.
destroyed him.
I watched that video today, actually. I
Yeah,
was just
yeah.
like, this is so funny.
It is so funny because like Marco, like he completely screwed himself. Yeah, like
Yeah.
up until that point, he had such good momentum, and then he like dropped it all, and because of Chris
Yeah.
Christie. Like, how do you feel about getting beat by Chris Christie?
He's so
um,
big.
yeah, he. Oh,
Metaphorically.
you know that whole report about people being like Chris Christie, you got to lose weight, and like he went on like a podium and he was like, no, don't talk to me about my health. That
That's
was
so
like,
funny.
yeah, it was pretty funny. But
I I heard that before the 2016 election, he had actually gotten like a gastric bypass. Like he was actually much bigger when he was governor.
oh yeah, I
Have you
heard
seen
about
like
that
the
too.
comparison pictures?
I've not seen the comparison pictures.
Yeah. He's still big though.
Um, well, he's got some ways to go. But
Yeah.
anyway, if Rubio does come back, though, I think people will still see what he did before, and I don't know if he has that kind of chance anymore. Rick
Mhm.
Scott, well, I can't really speak that much about Rick Scott. I personally am not, a big Rick Scott fan. Um, the
I
way,
feel if Rick does run though, like it depends. Like Floridians are the only people who really know like about Rick Scott, but he
yeah,
has made a name for himself in the Senate, particularly in contention with China. And he can
yeah.
really bring up like the jobs numbers that he brought to Florida. And like you could just say like, oh, I could bring that to the nationwide scale. And yeah, I could see Rick Scott really being a serious contender.
hmm Yeah, yeah. If yeah, definitely you saw like great job stores during Rick Scott's governorship. But again, with like the relations to China, like it, I don't know how people are gonna feel when they see that part um about that bill when it was like ban Chinese students from studying science in the
Yeah.
U.S. And I think that's also just like a slow national approach towards, and I think it's mainly due to Trump's actions, um, that China is like slowly becoming the enemy.
Hmm.
So like the South China Sea, and that was a big one. And just the way like Trump has been addressing China, especially with the whole like tariff war and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
People are really starting to look at China in like a whole new light.
Hmm.
And so, is that going to help Rick or not? I think that for the conservatives, yeah, they'll definitely be on his side. I'm not sure about the Democrats. Maybe, maybe not.
Hmm.
We'll have to see about that. But
I think.
yeah. What do you think about that?
No, just for the time being, though, we are going to see like a decrease in enrollment from all foreigners abroad, but in particular Chinese students in the U.S. And one of the big issues is you see these foreign students they're paying full boat at these institutions, and you see
Yeah.
like in some colleges it's like 15 to 20% of their budget is tuition from these foreigners, particularly Chinese foreigners studying, and
Mhm.
they just can't. They won't make it next year, and it's just like how you saw with like local businesses versus big box stores. Like the brick and mortar stores are going to go down, really. And like you see these viable
Yeah.
online alternatives for college education, and only the schools with like the bigger endowments will really make it.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy how much they contribute, and yeah, by not letting these Chinese students in particular study at your Harvard or whatever, it's definitely
Yeah,
going to choke them of like a
yeah,
good portion of their funds. And that goes into like private education as a whole in the United States, and are the prices they charge really fair? I genuinely
yeah.
believe, I might have read this somewhere, but also this is like a thing that like I feel like definitely happened, is that all the private schools got together and they were like, we're going to charge 60 grand for every student to come here. It's like, it's
It's
crazy how
huge.
expensive it is. Yeah. And I get that they have these land grants or whatever, and that they don't, sorry, they don't get these land grants or whatever, they have to pay for all this stuff. But it's for the student, it's very hard to justify these costs, and it's all become like
Mhm.
clout based,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it's always been centered around clout, but I think there are two main issues. The first is, I'm sure this is contentious still, but when the government started, I don't know if it's Pell Grants in particular, but um, federal like student aid in essence. So there's like a baseline that you can get for most people that they can get off their tuition, and then colleges saw that like, oh, they're getting the baseline. Why don't we
Yeah.
just charge them a little bit more so that they were paying the same, but we're charging more, and then we're getting the extra dime from the government. So that's where you see the upgraded inflation in college tuition rates that is not at all comparable with the regular inflation rate. And on the clout
Oh
point in
yeah.
particular, I was talking with some people in the college admissions field, and really it's due to like the rise of more the internet, but also the Common App as well. It just enables you to apply to all of these colleges. Like you see the Ivy Leagues, like in like the 80s and 90s when Yang went. Well, it's not really comparable because he went to grad school at Brown. But you see in the 80s and 90s, like their acceptance rate was in like the 20% or 30%. And it's like
Wow.
today we see schools like Harvard, it's like 5 or 6%. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, are the same people applying, or is it just you have more applicants, but maybe they're not all qualified? And that's really the question that we have to think about as students making our decisions.
Yeah, it's definitely true that there's definitely more people applying now to Harvard than there was back in like the 80s and 90s. But it goes to show that these colleges, especially the Ivies, and Harvard's like a huge one, but the Ivies in general, they have a reputation to hold, and that is being, so exclusive.
Hmm.
And so naturally they're going to choke out, less students.
Yeah.
And again, for the students that do get in, there's that stereotype of those Ivy League
Yeah.
students about all them being like rich and their parents are rich,
It's true.
and
It's
there's
true.
merit behind it. Yeah,
It is. Yeah.
there is. Yeah, and so it's kind of like it's kind of scary to think about when you put it like that.
Yeah. On the flip side of the coin, though, I was reading an article about Williams and Mary in Virginia, which is literally the second oldest school right after Harvard. And they're having trouble, particularly because of the foreign people who pay full boat. Yet they're in this issue where they see their applicants rate, the amount of applicants, it's not increasing, it's pretty steady, and yet their
Hmm.
expenditures are rising. So about 50% of their expenditures are covered by tuition. So they have to increase their acceptance rate in turn. And one of the issues that I noticed, particularly with Williams and Mary, it's like it's more women that are going to Williams and Mary. It's not a women's college. It's
Hmm.
co-ed. It's been co-ed for a while, but it's like close to 60 something percent. And they said the issue with
Wow.
that is when it goes higher, when it goes really above 60%, you have applicants begin to think, oh, this is a women's college, and as a man, I shouldn't apply here. Well, that might be what you think, but still, then you're going to have decreased applicants all over again. And like the flip side of Harvard, you have Williams and Mary, where they're really begging for more students, and now they have a 40% acceptance rate. And it's like they were this prestigious university, but when you go above 40%, it's like you're losing clout essentially.
That's very true. Yeah, like me, and I'm sure like pretty much all students, the very first thing that we look at when we look up a college is that acceptance rate.
Yeah.
And if it's high, you see like 80, like 80%, you're like, wow, this school must suck.
Exactly. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think the
that's
same.
like
Yeah.
yeah, it's like the first thought that appears in your mind. And that's not necessarily true. Um, but yeah, it goes on to say that now more than ever, there's so much more colleges, and because of that, a lot of degrees have been kind of like undermined. Like for example,
Mm-hmm.
an MBA, like back in the day, was like the same as like a doctorate. Like you were like a god if you had an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
But now, who doesn't have a master's?
Dime a dozen.
And so, yeah, with that, with there's more colleges, and like what I think that does is that it puts more responsibility on like the individual student to say like, okay, maybe I'm not in the most prestigious school, but I can still learn a lot, and I think people
Yeah.
can. And so I think it definitely puts less value on the school and more value on the person.
I think that also brings up like the wider issue is there's this pressure for everyone to go to college, like at any high school you go to really. And
Yeah.
yet we look back to like the 70s and 80s, and it's like not everyone went to college. Like maybe half the people went to college, and we still see in America more broadly, over half the people still don't have a collegiate degree. So I
Mhm.
think this was a issue, particularly with I'm hesitant to say this with the Obama administration because he kept emphasizing like college, college, college. but there was no talk about vocational school or trade school. And you do see members in the
Oh yeah,
Democratic
for sure.
Party, particularly Klobuchar, who I heard from in the debate, which I really applaud her for advocating not just free college for regular colleges, but she was talking specifically public colleges and trade schools, which I feel there's not enough
Yeah.
people going into these fields.
Yeah, and you can see those like some of like the blue collar jobs. You can see that market slowly going out, and I think in
Yeah,
turn, the big two factors are number one, less people want to go into those fields because college and college degrees are being so much more promoted in society, and also there's like automation. But then but to turn that on its head, you can also say like, how are you going to automate a plumber?
yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and the people make good money from that too. Like, Cool Today here.
Hmm.
I remember I was at like a networking event and like one of the Cool Today guys was there. And then he was like, oh, you should be a plumber. And he was like, you know how much I make? And I was like, how much do you make? $110,000 a year as a
Oh
plumber.
my
My mind was
gosh.
shattered. I was like, yeah, he's making more than like, like 3 times the national average salary. And he's like,
Exactly.
like just like fixing toilets. It's amazing.
Mm.
It's amazing. And I don't think people really realize that, is that the right job for me? Absolutely not. But maybe for some people who like don't want to do more of like scholarly things, you could maybe say
Yeah,
it could be a good fit for them. Yeah.
I agree.
Schools don't really promote that.
And I think it's part of like more of a broad societal change as well. Like we don't it starts in high school really, and when you don't promote the interest in students, they don't really go for it in college. And we see there was a study or survey rather. It's like majority of millennials that like own homes or rent, they don't have a hammer to like bang a nail in. They don't even own like
Oh.
the simplest tool
Yeah.
essentially. And it's like the dumbing down of America, like they don't know how to do things for themselves. And that starts really in high school. I'd like to think like you don't have shop class anymore. You don't have like cooking class. You don't have home economics. And that's kind of part of a bigger trend towards, well, how does that help me for college? And it's like,
Oh,
well, not
absolutely.
everyone should go to college. And yet you have the people who think they should go to college and yet they drop out. Maybe they should have taken that home ec course, except it's not offered.
Hmm. And yeah, people, especially Americans now, like there's definitely decline, especially with young people, about learning just like life skills in general. Like,
Hmm.
how is knowing stock patterns going to help you when your tire runs flat? You
Exactly.
know? Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely something that has to be addressed. And one thing like you saw at Pineview, next year they're having like what is it, like the home economics class? I think they just
Yes,
added.
they are implementing it. Yeah,
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a step in the right direction,
it
by
is.
putting more of these classes in, and they should start actually like requiring people to take it. Maybe
Hmm.
I'm not sure if that's the right move, but but them offering those classes is a good step, and I think hopefully other schools will start to follow along.
Yeah. I think one of the issues with that though is if like the state of Florida, I talked about this when I was in Tallahassee with some other people, but it's like if the state of Florida were to like as a state level to require these economics courses like home ec, it puts your students at a fundamental disadvantage compared to other states that don't require it. So in
That's true.
Florida specifically, we have the econ requirement, which macro applies, but micro doesn't apply. I think maybe broadening the requirements to maybe for the econ requirement, you could take home ec, which I think it might, or micro, which micro applies much more than macroeconomic theory. You're not going to use macro in your everyday life. So
Oh
I
yeah.
think that'd be one big thing. And I lost my thought where I was going to go, but did you have anything to add?
I mean, yeah, definitely for sure. But it also goes to how does college value it? Because
Yeah,
that's like the big thing when people say like it brings you at a disadvantage. It's really when it comes to college.
yeah.
And that's really up to them and their board to decide this is
Mhm.
more valuable than this. And it should be more valued, to be honest.
Yeah,
But at what the current status quo says, You know, I'd rather you take AP Calc. You know.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring that up because I think like we talk about like I think the new course is financial literacy or financial economics or something.
Yeah,
It's like it's being offered. I can't think of a single person who has told me they're going to take it. I can't
that's
think of
true.
one
Yeah, no one
name.
is on it.
Exactly. It's like I can think of like maybe a couple people who are going to take like the teaching class for like fun. I don't know. But
Mhm.
it's like in a world surrounded by pressure, even given the option, they're not going to take it. And that's part of the issue. You bring up calc. It's like we used to have honors calc. And for the past, I don't know if it was a year or 2 years, we had no honors calc. And this year they're bringing it
Oh,
back.
really?
But if you're taking calculus, you take calc honors on the flow chart, you're the lowest on the totem pole. And yet you're taking calculus in high school. So you're kind of
Yeah,
undervaluing
yeah,
people for what they're doing. And yet they're still doing something most people never even touch in their high school career.
yeah. Oh, I think that's just the Pine View thing, to be honest with you, because
It is. It is.
you look at like Riverview, like Sarasota High, and like calculus isn't even like on the flow chart unless you're like in their accelerated program.
Exactly.
And then so going back to what you're saying about like the class that you don't hear anyone taking it. Yeah, it is really upsetting. Like honestly, if it were up to me and I wasn't applying to colleges or having to worry about any of that, I would love to take like a financial literacy class.
Exactly.
But because of those pressures in college and all that stuff, you just got to like simp for it. You got to take the
Yeah.
classes that will make them like you, which is
Mm.
upsetting because it basically puts the entire high school experience on getting into college, which is the unfortunate truth of it. And what do you do in college? You grind to get a good job or whatever.
Mhm.
And again, it goes back into like, are we all just like slaves of the big economic machine? And
Mhm.
that's like the kind of process I think there's very few people who are taught or who really really pursue thinking outside the boat and thinking more of like entrepreneurship or like what kind of problems can I solve and do. And that's why you look at people like Bezos and like Musk or whatever, and they figured out a way to go outside that system. And it's
Yeah.
very impressive when you like think about them.
Yeah.
But no one is like that. Most
Mm.
people aren't like that.
And just going back to like the high school point, I think the major factor around like this race to the top for college admissions is really the College Board because they're the ones that control not just the SAT but the AP tests themselves.
Oh
And
yeah.
I look back, like I was talking with my mother. She went to a boarding school junior and senior year of high school, but still she only took one AP class, and she got into an Ivy League school. And we think like, well, how many AP classes were offered? Like 4 or 5. Like no one
Mm.
took all of them, and yet we have like Pineview. It's like 36 something AP classes. You can't even take all of them.
No,
And
yeah.
there's such pressure like, oh, there's 36, it can be easy if you take 12. And it's like most people aren't even taking like 2. I think
Mhm.
statewide still it's only like 45% of people take an AP class.
Actually, I think I was yeah, I think I have some family like Texas, and they're talking about how the school there literally says you cannot take more than 3 APs a year
Exactly. In
because
a
they don't
lot of
want you to
schools,
overload.
yeah, exactly. In a lot of schools, they don't even let you take AP classes until your junior year. And yet at
Yeah,
Pineview,
it's
we have this
crazy.
like lowering of the bar. Like psych used to be only a junior up class, and now we have
Mhm.
freshmen taking psych.
Yeah, and freshmen have AP classes and just in general.
Exactly.
That was
AP
never
AP
that was
Psych.
never a thing
Yeah.
before. And like human geo, yeah. It's crazy, like they're putting more and more work and more pressure on these students.
Yeah.
And it really, once I felt one of the big things I felt once I took my first AP class, sophomore year, that's when like that pressure of like college really really starts to hit you. I feel like, at least
Yeah.
in my experience, because once you know that there's an exam at the end and that exam will help you out for college, that's when you're kind of like, oh my god, I
Mm.
have to like apply to college. Yeah. So
Yeah. It's tough.
it's scary. It's a weird mindset, especially when like you're in freshman. You just want to like vibe in high school. You're
Hmm.
not allowed to vibe.
No, no, not anymore. I
Yeah.
did. It's funny talking about the College Board and AP test. I got an email from like College Express, which is just like a general college website. I barely even look at it at this point, but it's like sign up for like this random test. And it's like, we're gonna challenge the SAT and the ACT, like the false dichotomy.
Oh my
And it's
god.
like 70 college already take this test, and I look at the colleges that take it, and it's like they're all like Christian, like evangelical college, and I'm like, why would I take this? Like,
Oh my
no,
god.
it's
Well,
like
if you're a
maybe
Christian
one.
evangelical.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's like these small schools that you've never heard about, but it's like one in Florida. It's like that doesn't interest me, but it's the
Yeah.
barrier to challenge these multi-million dollar companies is so difficult. And with college boards, since as a nonprofit, they're able to take all this money from the fees from the SAT and the AP, and they just reinvest it into their like domination essentially of the education scene.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, I was watching a video talking about the reason why, like the ACT sells ACT prep books,
Hmm.
but the SAT doesn't sell SAT prep books. Let me rephrase that. Sell SAT prep books made by College Board.
Yeah.
And I was watching this video talking about like why, and it was saying like because if they do that, then they are essentially classified as a monopoly, and they would have to like
Uh-huh.
the government would step in. And it's
Uh-huh.
crazy to think about that because they just have so much control. Like there's no ACT subject test. There's no like what
Yeah.
is there? There's College Board. There's ACT like Kaplan. It's like what do
And
you,
yeah,
College Board is everything.
yeah, exactly. You have like companies like Kaplan and Princeton Review, and they're like bottom feeders sucking off like still millions of dollars off these students who are just taking like college boards tests, even up through grad
Yeah.
school, like the MCAT.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. Grad school is like a whole other beast,
Exactly.
but yeah, that's for sure. And there's also that debate about should standardized testings be be a thing in general, and
Yeah.
they do have its merits, and there's definitely good criticism against them, but at least for right now, they're going nowhere for the time being.
Hmm. And I think one of the issues is I I'm in this like chat group with these other students from like across the country in high school, and they're all like clapping on like, oh, Yale went test optional, yeah, Columbia went test optional. It's like that doesn't benefit you. That's just to
No.
keep their admissions rate low. Like if you submit an application without a test score, like they might look at it, but they're not gonna
Mhm.
really accept that many people on a test
Yeah.
score.
Yeah, I still have a chance getting in for like those Ivies. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's another big thing. And going back on the cloud, everyone wants to go to an Ivy for
Yeah.
that cloud. But then there's that other question of like, even if you get in, the workload there is like so intense. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if most people can handle it. I don't know even if I could
Yeah.
like handle that kind of workload. And it's just what people go for.
Mhm.
It's for
I
that
agree. Yeah.
prestige. But can they handle that prestige? That's another question.
Yeah, and I feel it just brings us back to like the point about like not everyone is meant to apply to Ivies, and you see people in the modern mindset. Like, I can even think like I think my cousin applied to Brown, and it's like she wasn't in a position to go to an Ivy League.
Mhm.
Like she went to another school, she dropped out after freshman year. Like
Yeah.
a mindset that we're stuck in as students. We aim for the top, but we have to be realistic.
That's very true. That's very true. Like, right now I'm wearing my Columbia sweater, because like I think Columbia is awesome. It's very pretty. It's in a great place in New York, but do I plan on applying to Columbia? No, I don't.
Mhm.
It's just like it's like those Ivy Leagues. They really do. They push you in a different kind of way, I
Yeah,
feel. It's not just like about working hard. It's also at least this is based off what I've been hearing from people who have been Ivy Leagues, and they make these videos and they just like talk about it. But it not only does it like push you to work harder, but also it's at the expense of your own mental space
yeah.
and just like being okay. And also doesn't really let you think about what you want to do as a person, and rather again just work on becoming a salary man.
Yeah, and moreover on that, like I read an article. It's like the value of a prestigious degree. It doesn't really give you an advantage, like
Mhm.
in salary wise. So
Well, I think
why are
that
we pushing ourselves?
depends.
It does depend. I think more broadly, prestigious institutions they don't give you an advantage, but I think Ivy League in particular it does.
Yeah, and also I think it's like between like undergrad and grad. Like going to Ivy for like a grad school is like a whole different experience than going there for
Yeah,
undergrad.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Um, And, that's another thing. Like grad school is like a whole other beast, and like grad school tuition, and like I thought undergrad was expensive, and you look at
Yeah,
grad,
yeah.
and it's like what?
And there's like
And
no financial aid for grad school,
yeah, there's
essentially.
no financial aid at all, and like for people going through the medical field, they have to do that for like 4, like up to like 6 years, I think.
So much
Well,
debt.
I don't think
Yeah.
residency counts, but yeah, they got to pay like tons of money, and that's why the doctors field like kind of like when I think about it, I just get scared because it was something that I used to want to pursue, but you see how much of your time gets spent just on school,
Mhm.
and just to go out and like, yeah, you're gonna make a great living, you're gonna have a great salary, but like all those fees that come from being in school and licensing and whatnot, it's like a whole process. And then for me at least, I want to pursue business, and then so I'm looking at what an MBA costs, and MBA is only like 2 years, which is relatively short when you compare it to the others, but still you look at
Mhm.
like the tuition for like the Ivy Leagues, and undergrad it's like what, like 50-60 grand, whatever, for
Yeah.
mostly. You look at like for grad it's like 80 to 90, and like actually I was looking
Oof.
at Columbia, it's $110,000, and it's like, wow, it's crazy. It's like, what? Yeah, I
It's
better be
a
like Wolf of Wall Street after
Yeah.
that.
It's like a Harvard Business School moment. Like what Harvard Business School teaches you and what it doesn't teach you. You have like all the knowledge in 2 books.
Yeah, and it's like, oh my god, it is so expensive, it's scary.
Mm. Yeah. But it's part of a bigger issue, and I just can't see any real solution to it as a problem, because like you can't like Sherman antitrust College Board, and
Oh.
even then like that it's like you can't do that, and
Yeah.
the institutions themselves, they would just continue their current practices. You just have a few outliers that go against the grain, and I just can't for the love of me think of a real solution to the problem.
Yeah, because I think that if there was a solution to the problem, you'd basically be going against corporate America as a whole.
Yeah.
And that's something that America is never going to do, at least what's going on right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I just don't know. I just don't know. I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, are we going for the clout? Like, yeah, but we going in debt? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of the bigger like culture, like debt taking culture. You can't take on, I think, more than $5,000 in debt without your parents' approval. And
Oh,
you
really?
have parents, yeah, yeah. You have parents across the country who are essentially like allowing their kids to take on this debt. And
Hmm.
they think like, oh, I got a very generous financial aid package. They don't really look into it and see like, oh, like half of it is loans. It's
That's
like,
very
well,
true.
how
You're
am I going to
right.
pay this back?
Yeah, America's economy is very, very functional and very reliant on loans and debt,
Yeah,
mortgages and college students, and
yeah,
it's a very, very vicious cycle. And what it does is that it gives more power to these banks, and that's why people are like, "Oh, the banks control everything." Like, yes, they
mhm.
do because
Yeah,
the
they do.
economy lets them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And like on the mortgages, like most people, like they own their house. And in today's climate, like everyone has a mortgage, and it's like you're an outlier if you actually own your house.
yeah, you
And
spend like 30 something years just paying that off.
exactly. And then what's it worth at that point? Like you think about inflation, you're paying astronomically more amounts. It's like you have like payments on a car. Like the car's not worth as much by the end of your payments as you actually paid for over
That's very
time.
true.
You're kind of wasting money in a sense. And it's the same way for mortgages. And you can even make a stretch and say it's the same way for college.
Yeah, I think at least for housing, though, one of the big things about that is because housing itself is just becoming more expensive, like the
Yeah.
land and the material, and especially with more and more people being born. It's just more expensive to have a house, like compared to like back then. Like, like when like Sears used to sell like the houses and they would just like deliver it
Yeah.
to you.
Yes. Yes. I saw that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen
Um,
pictures of like ones that are still standing from Sears.
Yeah, it's impressive. So
Yeah.
like, that's another thing about like going back to like consumerism, we've been seeing like the general quality of products to like decline. Like, for example, there's some like shoes that were like made in like the 80s that like they're still very usable today, you
Yeah.
know? Like you cannot buy a shoe today and expect it to last like 20 years, 20, 30 years.
Exactly.
It's like it's crazy. So craftsmanship has gone down, quality has gone down, everything has just gone down in general, and yet the costs seem to go up,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
think is like a worldwide trend.
It's part of the consumer culture, I think. And as long as there's like inequality in a sense, not just domestically, but between countries, there's always going to be that drive from the upper class, we say, which is America. It's like we want these goods, but we want it cheaper. We want it cheaper. And then you have, I don't want to say lower class, but you have these other countries like China, and now China is becoming more upper class, and it's shifting to
They
countries
are,
like
yeah.
Vietnam and Indonesia, which are able to pay
Hmm.
like for simplicity's sake, like $1 an hour for labor. And
Yeah,
as long as
Vietnam's going to a new
there's
labor place.
yeah, as long as there's that worldwide inequality, there's always going to be that drive for cheaper, cheaper, cheaper.
Yeah, and that goes on to whole like lesser developed countries, and the more developed countries being like, frankly, they just have control over them.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, kind of like back when like the British had like Africa, or like even India, you
Yeah.
can even call it like that. Maybe not that intense, but
Mhm.
they definitely have an economic grasp on them, which is
Yeah.
really, really tough.
We look back to the colonial period and we see like, well, they weren't a colony, they were in their like zone of influence. But we see now it's like, well, we have countries that are in our zone of influence. Like Iraq is in our zone of influence. We have so much
Hmm.
oil that's just coming domestically to prop up our domestic oil expenditures. And it's like we're fighting these wars, and yet the money could have been going domestically, but it's part of that
Yeah,
equality issue. As long as it's cheaper to pump oil in Iraq, why should we pump it from like a Texas oil field, for example?
yeah, it's really, yeah. That's another thing. Like I still, every time I look at the U.S. military budget, I'm always just like amazed at just how much
Yeah,
we spend on the military compared to other things. That money definitely could afford free college
yeah,
or like free public transport or whatever. It's crazy how much they spend, and like for what? Like, yeah, we're getting oil, we're getting all this and that, but at the same time, we're also oppressing and like killing these people. And
exactly.
there is that whole like Islamophobia that's been going on recently. Well, by
Hmm.
recently I mean like the past like 10, 20 years, ever since 9/11, really. Um, and during that time, you could definitely, during like 9/11, during that time, you could definitely justify going to war with these countries. But the fact that we're
Hmm.
still there is just amazing. And
Yeah,
I hear people talking about how like the main reason why is because there's so much instability in the region. If the US were to suddenly pull out, they basically
but
go to
we
civil
brought it.
war.
We brought the
And yeah, we
instability.
were the ones who like put them there in the first place, so like, come on.
Yeah,
Yeah, and now it's just like the entire thing feels pointless.
yeah. And I think Pete Buttigieg said it like the best. Like even though people have their qualms with him as a candidate. Like we have people fighting in Afghanistan, I think Afghanistan instead of Iraq,
Hmm.
who are fighting there and they weren't even alive to see the September 11th attacks. And it's weird to think that way because like
uh
the threat it might still be there, but the threat domestically, it's just not the same.
yeah, like you don't hear about terrorism in America. In fact, like, at least I haven't heard anything about like ISIS or like Al Qaeda, any of those organizations, just that kind of terrorism going on just in general. I
Yeah.
haven't heard anything about it. Is it
There's
still
there's been
happening?
a
Maybe.
there's been
But
a decline, but now we see like a gradual pullback in Afghanistan, and like the Taliban has like a majority control over Afghanistan right now
mhm.
because it's hard for us to think, but before we invaded Afghanistan, like the Taliban was the government,
Yeah,
and
that's very
to the
true.
people, the democratic like regime essentially that we installed, it's like that's not what they had to deal with. They thought the Taliban was the government, so why should we believe this U.S. prop-up government is any better?
Yeah, yeah. We're basically going there, and that's another thing about the U.S. So there's so much, there's so much promotion of democracy and the rule of the people, and for some of these countries that we're trying to help, or at least that's the story. We're trying to help these countries. A lot of the times, honestly, democracy is not the best move, especially for them, because
Yeah,
for the people, their mindset is already so focused on the oppressors, and they
exactly.
say that believe that mindset, which is not the right mindset. So there really are some times where you just gotta like where we gotta take control and just say, this is right, this is wrong, and again, it's a very morally gray area because again, who are we to
Mhm.
decide,
Exactly.
what's right or what's wrong? Is it because and like in this case, it's because we have the bigger guns.
Yeah, and I
Yeah,
think that's a great point that I believe Tulsi Gabbard brought up during
Tulsi was so
Tulsi.
good.
She was so good, and yet she
Yeah,
was smeared by the media. But her idea, like against these regime change wars, like she's kind of a broken drum at that point because she's talking about these things, and that's her main candidacy issue. But we've spent already trillions in Iraq, where we probably could have rebuilt like the interstate system like 2 times over at this point. Like you think
yeah.
all this money, but we don't think of that in domestic terms, like how much we're wasting.
Yeah, yeah. There's actually, I remember Bernie Sanders. This was something I watched. This was like a speech he gave in Congress in like the 90s. And basically all of it was just talking about how like it's ridiculous how much we're spending on the military. And it's just very sad to see like that's still applicable today.
Yeah,
It's been
yeah.
going on for so long.
And
And
even
yeah,
in Eisenhower's like farewell address when he was leaving the White House, he said the biggest issue is the military industrial complex. I'm paraphrasing, but we've seen that perpetuate into like today's age, and no one has really stood up against it. I feel.
absolutely. Yeah, because, it's just one of the reasons why the US has so much clout because our
Yeah,
military is so good.
yeah.
And that's something that we can't really let go of.
Yeah, and bringing up that, like, one of the main opponents or one of the main rebuttals to the Tulsi point is like, well, the U.S. is the world's policeman, right?
Yeah.
But when we think about, like, look back at previous incidents, like, we think about, like, the Yugoslav war in some parts of it, not in others, and, like, the Rwandan genocide, like, where was the U.S. when these things happened?
Hmm.
And one of the main faults of the Clinton administration, like he didn't do anything about the Rwandan genocide. Like thousands of people died.
Yeah.
And we think the only time we send in our troops is when, if you really think about it in the modern age, is when it benefits us.
Yeah, exactly. So, that term of the US as the world's policeman is definitely not applicable. We're
Not
definitely
anymore.
very much geared towards our own gain, just like any country really is, frankly. Like China is pumping so much money into Africa for their
Exactly.
development. Is that because they want to help Africans?
No.
Maybe, probably not.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I think because of that, that's why also the U.S. is starting to get more involved into Africa as well. And it's very sad to see Africa is at the end of like this tug of war between like China and like UK and like the U.S. now. Same with like Hong Kong, or like no, sorry, well, yeah, Hong Kong actually, and like Taiwan. You know,
Yeah.
they're like in the middle of like this big tug of war between the big superpowers right now, which would be US,
Mhm.
China, and the UK. Yeah.
Do you think there's and what do you think the path forward is for Taiwan right now?
For Taiwan,
Yeah.
that's tough. Because yeah, there's so much politics that goes involved into it. Because the US is going to do nothing to help Taiwan.
Exactly.
Because if they do, then China's going to get involved, and we would all die
Yeah.
if the U.S. and China go to war. And but the Taiwanese people, they don't want to like sit around, because the more they sit around, the more China asserts its like control over them, and the more that one China. Oh.
Yeah. And I think the US, we're so economically dependent on China, we've just kind of cut off ties with Taiwan in a sense. Like
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. And
Trump's tried to
moreover,
challenge that though.
yeah, he has, but there hasn't, like, he had a phone call. I think
Yeah,
that's really
nothing
it.
has worked really.
Nothing has worked. And I think one of the big things with Taiwan is that they've had like polls since Taiwan became what it is right now. And it's like year over year, more people in Taiwan think of themselves as Taiwanese instead of Chinese.
Oh yeah,
Because
absolutely.
now they've been separated so long, they've developed their own sense of identity. They're not like the nationalist party. They're Taiwanese. They've lived on this island their whole life.
And the economy there is also like entirely different, like how
Yeah,
they run.
exactly.
It's also like capitalism basically.
Yeah.
And that's another thing actually, because like so many people are like China is so communist. China is actually much more capitalist than the US is. Like
Yeah.
if you fail in China, you are dead. You don't go to college, you are literally dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's crazy. And because China has that label communist, but they're nowhere near communism.
Yeah.
America is like like to that degree. America is more communist than China
Yeah.
is, which is crazy.
Because we have this form of like social safety net that you could at least fall back on.
Yeah, yeah. And so for Taiwan, yeah, they're in such like a sticky situation. So like, it's very hard to tell what they're gonna do. If I'm not mistaken, didn't the whoever the head is there, I don't know if they call him the president or not, but basically, I believe she did say that we are independent. It wasn't
Essentially.
like it wasn't
Yeah.
like an official declaration, but it was basically saying
Yeah.
like we are independent.
Yeah.
And China's not gonna have any of that. But one thing for China though right now is that they don't really care too much about Taiwan right now. The big focus is on Hong Kong. And I don't know if you heard, but recently there was that thing about China sending Beijing officials to Hong Kong, basically to like look, basically just to monitor them. And because of that, you actually saw like a huge surge of like increasing VPN downloads. I think VPN downloads went up like 500 something percent in Hong Kong. It's
I believe
huge.
it.
Yeah, because of these people. And then so honestly, I never really understood why like the Hong Kong protests began. I know about the whole like the court thing, but I didn't really fully understand it. But at least the point is right now though is that Hong Kong, while they're not in like the same kind of position as Taiwan, because Taiwan is so much stronger than Hong Kong at least.
Yeah.
The Hong Kong still definitely play a, they're more of like they're a pretty chip.
Yeah.
And by that what I mean, like, it looks nice. It's not like Taiwan where like they at least got pretty good money. Hong Kong just like it looks cool because the UK, they had onto them and now they had to give it to China reluctantly, but it is what it is. And so now Hong Kong is just also in like the middle, and US and UK, maybe the UK might get involved. They haven't done anything, the UK. US
Well,
is
they
definitely
have
not
done a
gonna-
little. The UK just offered visas to people in Hong Kong.
Oh, is that
You
true
hear that?
actually?
Yeah,
No, I did
they
not
did.
hear about that.
Because
Okay. Oh, that's good for them.
a lot of people since '93 when the turnover happened, they've been keeping their. I'm not sure the official language, but like a British overseas passport, because even though it might not be as strong as like a Chinese passport or a Hong Kong passport, rather, like it's certification that you're like a British overseas citizen, and people value that much more.
Yeah.
And I think they've just started like you had to be grandfathered in to keep it, but I think now Boris Johnson offered it to the people of Hong Kong again.
Oh, that's really good actually.
Yeah,
I don't know how
because
China's gonna look at that though.
yeah, no, they're pretty pissed about it, and
Yeah.
I think one of the issues is like Mike Pompeo and the Secretary of State, or he is the Secretary of State rather. He he downgraded Hong Kong. They're like no longer autonomous in the U.S.'s view, which is a big issue because
Yikes.
Hong
Yeah.
Kong is supposed to be integrated into China in a not a few years, but a few more years from now. But it's kind of happening a little too fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the people there, they don't want to lose what they have been, what they have
Yeah.
had.
Yeah, but then you look to like Macau and like they're happily under China's thumb. It's kind of like
That's very
tale
true.
of two brothers.
But Macau is number one. Macau is smaller than Hong Kong,
Yeah, much smaller.
and they're very specialized.
Yeah, casino.
And that like all the casinos there, and it's also crazy how like there's so much U.S. investors that are also in Macau. So I don't know if you know about this, but Vegas. So
It dwarfs in comparison to Macau.
yeah. But also, there's so many people. There's one specific company. I forgot the name of the company, but basically, they were the ones who built one of the big casinos in Vegas. I forgot what it's called, but basically, like one of its distinct landmarks is that it's basically modeled after Venice, like Venice, Italy.
Mhm.
And so, literally inside the casino, there's like a river in the casino, and like they have people on boats that like get you around. It's pretty hype. But anyway, that same company with that same casino, they basically they were like, okay, we're gonna put that in Macau, but we're gonna make it even bigger. so it's crazy because like there's actually a lot of companies who are in both, who were originally in Vegas and who are now also in Macau.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Like, what is Macau gonna do if like any trouble arises?
Nothing. They can't.
Yeah, nothing.
And I think that's part of like the broader transition. Like Portugal was much more lenient towards handing over the reins to China than the UK was. The UK was a little bit more reluctant.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. China really is slowly. I wouldn't actually say slowly anymore. They're really starting to come more into the forefront, and you definitely see like right now, at least with the Trump administration, there's been more butting of heads between Trump and Xi.
Yeah.
And I don't think right now we're definitely not going to end up in a war. Yeah. But it's definitely, there's definitely a lot of tension, and it's very worrying.
Yeah. When we look to Xi, and I think one of his main concerns, maybe more weeks ago, more months ago, but it was kind of probably North Korea. And they're kind of like the little brother to China, because North Korea was like advancing at a pretty high rate in like I think the 50s when the Soviet Union was there to help them. But now they're kind of like stranded. And now we see the ailing health, North Korea, and we see the ailing health of Kim Jong-un. And Xi has to think to himself, whoa, what's going to happen if Un dies? Because there's no like real successor as there has been in the past 2 regime changes.
Well, there are people talking about his sister, who that would be really, really scary if his sister
would be interesting.
Yeah, because she's so much more vicious than Kim.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, just like in her and like what she wants to do. But I don't think Kim is going anywhere soon, at least.
You don't think so?
No, I don't think so, because those reports, I honestly feel like those reports had like no ground, and like he's there, he's kicking around. Yeah, and so at least I don't think Kim is going to be going anywhere soon. But Trump definitely, one thing that you can definitely commend Trump for is that he definitely did smooth tensions out between North Korea quite a bit.
We can say that though. We think that, but like what change has actually been brought by the summits with North Korea?
Legally, or like none. But
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, but it's nice to know though that he went over there and he was like, "Yo, Kim, this is the border. Did you know that?" That's another thing. Like, legislation doesn't necessarily mean that nothing has happened.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, I think he did smooth out tensions with North Korea better. But I still think South Korea though, that South Korea doesn't care. South Korea is like, all right, if it comes to it, we're just gonna like kill North Korea.
Do you think there's unity in the future for North and South Korea?
And the current pace, absolutely not. Well, yeah, at least not with the Kims in power, because the people there, it's kind of like, it's like Russia in a way that like all of them support, for the vast majority of them support Kim, because that's all they ever know. They don't really get too much knowledge outside about the outside world. And if they do get knowledge about the outside world, they try to leave like immediately. Like, I don't know if you heard about the one guy in North Korea who was in a math competition, and then he was sent to the US to compete, and then he literally just like left. Yeah. So, like for the vast majority of the people in North Korea, they don't really know too much because of like all the propaganda and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, on that part, they're not going to go anywhere soon.
Yeah, just building off that, I did hear a report. It's like a staggering number, like increase of cell phones in North Korea. It's like a new thing, because the regime, like they have to allow technology in some sense. So like some information is getting in, just we don't know what, I guess.
Yeah. And it's crazy how like information now is becoming like the new form of warfare.
Yeah.
Especially with like now that everything is like digital, like Whoa.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
information is so much more power now. Um, so for the North Koreans, it's very hard to tell what's going to happen with them. It's kind of like, do they have nuclear weapons? I don't think they do.
They have nuclear warheads, is my understanding, but I don't believe they have fully
Okay.
capable ICBMs. They say they do, but
Oh.
we've seen like the failed missile trials, or at least some of them. And I don't think they'd be able to reach the U.S. But
Yeah,
the issue
definitely
is they
not.
would be able to reach South Korea.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. And that would be a big issue.
Yeah,
And actually I believe that's like some stuff China has. China is basically protecting South Korea. Like they have like those like anti, missile machines things. And I believe they have those pointed at North Korea in case they were to
really.
launch a warhead. Yeah, yeah. This is like a few years ago, so like I would assume that they would still have it. But yeah, they basically have like these anti-missile things pointed at North Korea. So if they were to ever launch something, anything that could hit like South Korea or like even China or whatever, it would knock it out and it would knock
I
out
didn't
the
know
air.
that. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and if they were to do that, it'd be basically a huge declaration of war, and
Yeah,
they would just get like demolished
yeah.
immediately. Yeah.
But talking about like the digital revolution and like informational warfare, I feel like compared to the U.S., China is kind of like two steps ahead of us in a sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, China's like, oh my god, they don't even carry wallets with them anymore. Everything's on your phone.
Yeah,
Like WeChat, like there's like and like Jack Ma, and like Alipay. It's amazing what they've done, and like some at like some vending machines even now they scan your face, and that's like the whole your social what is it called, like your social
social
points
credit.
basically. Yeah, your social credit. And it's scary, it's very big brother like. um
Yeah,
but for the average person who doesn't do anything wrong or breaks any laws per se, it's very convenient,
yeah,
which is like a big debate in like in the current information age, which is, do you sacrifice convenience um for like privacy, you
yeah,
know like I see a lot of people now with like the Google Homes or like the Alexa, the Amazon things.
yeah,
And people use it all the time, and like for me, just the very idea something like that exists is like very scary. It's very scary
yeah.
because like I don't know if you know this, but Bezos has like a $400 million deal with the CIA.
Well, I
Yeah,
didn't
and
know that.
yeah, and like basically like the whole term of the contract is like Alexa information. It's crazy.
Mm.
It's crazy.
Yeah, they do
Um,
listen in on us. It's true. That's why I don't have
yeah.
one.
Yeah. I would never have one. I would like
Yeah,
burn one if I were to be given one. But
yeah. There's like
yeah.
lawsuits about it. Like they hear like private conversations, like intimate stuff too. It's like funny to hear that, but like you could say like they could already do that with their cell phones. It's just a lot
Oh
easier with
yeah.
Alexa and Google. Well,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. They definitely have better what do you call it? Microphones on
range.
those,
Yeah,
yeah, and the range on those things than like your phone. But yeah, it comes to the point where the phone is so integrated into our life, you literally can't live now without one.
yeah,
So, just good for Google, I guess,
yeah.
or whatever.
It's
Yeah,
true. Well, Brian, I gotta be honest. I am getting tired, but we are almost at the 2 hour mark. So, which
based.
button is the? Here we
It
go.
should be the second one. Yeah.
There we go. And that is first episode.